I'm Lieutenant Colonel Shelby Croft, 37 years old, and I built my career translating words that could start or stop wars. For years, I stood in my brother's shadow, supporting his infantry path, letting his achievements shine louder than mine. But when he mocked my useless translator job during our father's retirement dinner, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been dismissed by someone you'd do anything to protect? Undervalued for the work no one ever sees? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, quiet strength, and reclaiming your worth. What happened next might surprise you. I grew up understanding that service meant sacrifice. My father, Colonel Richard Croft, wore his uniform like a second skin for over 25 years, and when my brother Daniel followed him into the infantry, it felt inevitable. Natural. Like gravity pulling metal to a magnet. I watched them both from the kitchen window as they ran drills in our backyard, Daniel barely 13, but already moving like he owned the obstacle course Dad had built between the oak trees. They'd come inside smelling like sweat and summer grass, talking about maneuvers and formations, their voices overlapping in a language I didn't yet speak. I wanted to be part of that world. Not standing at the window, but inside it. When Daniel enlisted at 18, I was 15 and already studying Arabic at community college. Mom thought it was a phase. Dad didn't say much, just watched me conjugate verbs at the dinner table the way other kids did geometry homework. Daniel teased me about it, but it wasn't mean then. He'd ruffle my hair and say, "Gonna negotiate peace in the Middle East, Shelby?" And I'd laugh and tell him someone had to do the thinking while he did the running. We were close back then. The kind of close where you don't need to explain yourself, because the other person already knows. He taught me how to read maps, and I taught him enough Russian to order vodka and ask for directions. We had this unspoken agreement that we'd both serve, just in different ways. He'd be the boots on the ground. I'd be the voice that made sense of the noise. I entered the Defense Language Institute at 19, right after finishing my bachelor's degree. The program was intensive, immersive, relentless. 8 hours a day of Arabic, then Russian in the evenings. By the time I graduated, I could think in 3 languages and dream in all of them. I enlisted as a 35M, a human intelligence collector, and spent my first 2 years doing exactly what Daniel predicted I'd do, translating, interpreting, sitting in rooms with headsets while other people made the decisions. But I was good at it. Better than good. My commander noticed. He recommended me for OCS, and at 23, I earned my commission as a second lieutenant. Daniel was a specialist by then, and when I told him about the promotion, he grinned and said, "Look at you, Officer Croft. Guess you'll outrank me soon." "Guess so," I'd said, and we'd laughed about it. I made captain at 27. Daniel made captain at 29. For a while, it felt like we were neck and neck, just on different tracks. But something had shifted. The teasing wasn't quite as light anymore. At family dinners, he'd dominate the conversation with stories from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from places I'd been to, but couldn't talk about. When I mentioned working with coalition linguists or briefing senior officers, he'd smile and say things like, "Must have been rough. Did you have to PowerPoint your way through it?" Mom would laugh. Dad would nod along. And I'd sit there, pushing food around my plate, knowing I couldn't explain that I'd spent the previous month analyzing intercepted communications that helped locate a high-value target. Couldn't tell them that my translations had been cited in a joint task force report. Couldn't say any of it. So I didn't. The silence became a habit. And Daniel's jokes became sharper. By the time I made major, Daniel was still a captain. He'd been passed over once for promotion, something to do with an evaluation that didn't go his way. He didn't talk about it much, but I could see it bothered him. At my promotion ceremony, he showed up in dress uniform, stood in the back, and left before the reception. Mom said he had duty. Dad said he was proud of both of us. Neither of them asked why he hadn't stayed. I wanted to reach out, to tell him it wasn't a competition, but every time I tried, the words stuck. And every time we were together, he'd find a way to make it clear that what I did wasn't quite real. Not like what he did. Not like actual combat. You're doing important work, he'd say, in that tone people use when they're trying to be supportive, but don't really mean it. Someone's gotta handle the paperwork. I'd smile and change the subject. Colonel Harland Pierce, my senior officer, once told me that the best intelligence work is the kind no one knows about. You don't do this job for recognition, Croft, he said. You do it because it matters. And if you're doing it right, no one will ever know how much. I believed him. I had to. But it didn't make the family dinners any easier. Daniel got married that year to a woman named Jenna, someone he met during his second deployment. She was sweet, civilian, worked as a nurse. At their wedding, during his toast, he thanked everyone who'd supported him through the hard times, through the deployments, through the things that real soldiers face. He didn't mention me specifically, but when people asked what I did, he'd say intelligence. She sits in an office and listens to recordings. Jenna would look at me apologetically. I'd smile and nod. It was easier than explaining. By then, I was working in a joint operations center, part of a team analyzing signals intelligence from Eastern Europe. The job was demanding, high stakes, and entirely classified. I'd leave work at 1800 hours most days, drive home to my apartment, and decompress by running or reading or doing anything that didn't involve thinking in multiple languages at once. I loved the work. I was good at it. And I knew it mattered. But Daniel didn't see that. He saw someone who wore a uniform but never got dirty. Someone who got promoted without, in his mind, earning it the way he had. I stopped trying to convince him otherwise. Dad's retirement ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in late September. The weather was perfect, crisp and clear, the kind of day that makes you grateful to be alive. The ceremony itself was formal, traditional, full of speeches about honor and service and legacy. Dad stood there in his dress blues, stoic as ever, while a 2-star general pinned his retirement insignia and thanked him for his decades of dedication. Afterward, we went to a restaurant downtown, one of those places with white tablecloths and a wine list thicker than a field manual. The whole family was there, Mom, Daniel, Jenna, a few of Dad's old army buddies, and me. The conversation flowed easily at first, stories about old deployments, jokes about the changes in the army since Dad's time, toasts to his service. Then Daniel stood up. He raised his glass, smiled at the table, and said, "Here's to Dad, the soldier who actually fought." Not everyone who plays with headsets and coffee cups can say that. The table erupted in laughter. A few people clapped. Someone said, "Here, here." I kept my face neutral, smiled politely, and sipped my water. But something inside me cracked. Because just 2 weeks earlier, I'd been in a secure facility outside Washington, headset on, listening to a recorded call between a Russian intelligence officer and an Iraqi intermediary. The initial translation, done by a contractor, had been wrong. Not slightly wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The kind of wrong that, if acted upon, could have triggered a diplomatic crisis or worse. I'd caught it, corrected it, resubmitted the analysis, and quietly, without fanfare, prevented what could have been a significant escalation. But I couldn't tell Daniel that. Couldn't tell anyone at that table. So I smiled. And I let him have his moment. The disrespect didn't start suddenly. It accumulated over years, like sediment building at the bottom of a river, layer upon layer, until one day you look down and realize the water's not clear anymore. When we were younger, Daniel's teasing was affectionate. He'd joke about my textbooks, my flashcards, the way I'd practice pronunciation while doing dishes. But somewhere along the way, affection curdled into dismissal. And I watched it happen without knowing how to stop it. After I made captain, the dynamic shifted. Family dinners became performances where Daniel held court, recounting patrol stories, firefights, close calls. He had a gift for storytelling, a way of making you feel like you were there with him, crouched behind a Humvee or clearing a building room by room. People listened. People asked questions. And when they did, he'd lean back in his chair, confident, assured, the center of gravity in any room. I'd sit quietly and let him talk. When someone asked what I did, the energy would shift. Daniel would jump in before I could answer. "Shelby's in intelligence," he'd say. She translates stuff. It's important work, just not, the kind that gets your boots dirty. He'd smile when he said it, like it was a compliment. Mom would try to steer the conversation elsewhere. Dad would nod and change the subject. And I'd feel that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that said, don't engage. Don't explain. It's not worth it. But it was worth it. I knew it was. I just couldn't prove it. One evening, about 6 months before Dad's retirement, we were all at my parents' house for Sunday dinner. Daniel had just returned from a rotation in Poland, part of a NATO training exercise, and he was in high spirits. Jenna sat beside him, laughing at his jokes, her hand resting on his arm. Dad grilled steaks on the back patio while Mom set the table. It was the kind of scene that should have felt warm, familial, easy. But I felt like an outsider. Daniel was talking about the exercise, about live-fire drills and coordination with Polish infantry units. Someone asked if I'd ever deployed overseas, and I said yes, I'd been to Qatar, to Djibouti, to Germany on temporary assignments. Daniel laughed. Germany. That's basically a vacation. I was working joint operations, I said evenly. Coordinating with coalition partners. Right. Coordinating. Must have been intense. Did you conjugate some verbs together? The table laughed. Even Dad cracked a smile. I didn't respond. Just cut my steak and chewed slowly. Later, after dinner, I helped Mom with the dishes. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me plates to dry while she scrubbed. Finally, she spoke. Daniel doesn't mean anything by it, she said softly. I know. He's proud of you. He just doesn't know how to show it. I set a plate down carefully. If that's what pride looks like, I'd hate to see disapproval. Mom sighed. He's been under a lot of stress. The promotion board didn't go his way, and I think he's struggling with that. That's not my fault. I'm not saying it is. We finished the dishes in silence. But the conversation stayed with me. Because the truth was, Daniel's resentment wasn't really about me. It was about his own insecurities, his own sense that he'd been overlooked, undervalued. And the easiest way to deal with that was to diminish what I did, to make my accomplishments feel smaller so his didn't feel inadequate. I understood that. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. At work, I was thriving. I'd been assigned to a joint task force focused on Eastern European signals intelligence, monitoring communications between Russian military units and tracking potential threats to NATO infrastructure. The work was demanding, technical, and required not just linguistic fluency, but cultural understanding, the ability to read between the lines and catch what wasn't being said. One afternoon, Colonel Pierce called me into his office. He was a tall man, graying at the temples, with the kind of calm authority that made people instinctively straighten their posture when he entered a room. Sit down, Croft, he said, gesturing to a chair. I sat. He leaned back, studying me. You've been doing exceptional work. Thank you, sir. I mean it. The analysis you submitted last month on the intercepted logistics chatter, that was sharp. You caught details our contractors missed. I nodded. Just doing my job, sir. That's the thing, though. You do your job well, and no one outside this building will ever know. That bother you? I thought about it. Not really. Good. Because this job isn't about medals or recognition. It's about making sure the people who do get recognized can do their job safely. You're providing Overwatch, Croft. The best kind. The invisible kind. I understand, sir. He nodded. I know you do. I also know you've got family in the infantry. That can make things complicated. I didn't ask how he knew. Commanders always knew more than they let on. It's fine, sir. Is it? I met his eyes. It has to be. He studied me for another moment, then nodded. All right. Dismissed. I left his office feeling steadier. Because he was right. The work mattered. Whether Daniel understood that or not. But a week later, at another family dinner, Daniel made a comment about people who hide behind desks and never see real action, and I felt that steadiness crack again. I didn't argue. Didn't defend myself. I just let it go. Because what was the alternative? Telling him about the intercepted communications I'd analyzed that helped prevent an ambush on a convoy in Syria? Explaining that my translations had been briefed to a 3-star general? Revealing classified information just to win an argument at a dinner table? No. So I stayed silent. And Daniel kept talking. By the time Dad's retirement came around, I'd built a wall between us. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but out of necessity. Because every time I tried to bridge the gap, every time I tried to explain what I did, he'd find a way to dismiss it. And I was tired of trying. When he made that toast at Dad's retirement dinner, when he joked about headsets and coffee cups, I didn't feel angry. I felt resigned. Because I realized something sitting there, smiling politely while people laughed, Daniel would never understand. And more importantly, I didn't need him to. The work spoke for itself, even if no one else could hear it. The sting of that toast lingered longer than I wanted to admit. I replayed it in my head for days afterward, turning it over like a stone I couldn't quite put down. The laughter. The casual cruelty of it. The way Daniel had looked so pleased with himself, like he'd landed the perfect punchline. What bothered me wasn't just the mockery. It was the fact that 2 weeks earlier, I'd been sitting in a windowless room at Fort Meade, staring at a transcription that could have changed everything. The call had been intercepted by an NSA partner station, a routine collection swept up in a broader monitoring operation targeting Russian military communications. Initial translation had been contracted out, standard protocol for lower priority intercepts. But something about the summary flagged wrong when it crossed my desk for review. The phrasing felt off, the context didn't align, and the recommended action, to forward the intelligence to Yukum for immediate tactical response, seemed disproportionate. I pulled the original audio. The conversation was between a Russian GRU officer stationed in Moscow and an intermediary operating out of Baghdad. The contractor had translated a key phrase as "prepare to activate the network," which, in context, suggested an imminent coordinated strike against U.S. assets in Iraq. But that wasn't what was said. The actual phrase, accounting for dialect and colloquial usage, was "prepare to evaluate the network." A routine administrative check-in. Not a call to action. Not a green light for violence. One word. That's all it took. If the mistranslation had gone unchallenged, Yukum might have escalated force posture. Troops might have been mobilized. Diplomatic channels might have been burned. And in the worst case, people might have died over a clerical error. I submitted a corrected analysis with a full linguistic breakdown, cited the dialectical variations, and recommended the intercept be downgraded to administrative monitoring. Colonel Pierce reviewed it personally. 2 days later, he called me into his office. "Your correction was right," he said. "The original translation could have caused serious problems." "I'm glad I caught it, sir." So is the Pentagon. This stays quiet, Croft. No commendations, no public record. But people at the top know what you did. I nodded. That was how it worked in intelligence. You did the job, and if you did it right, no one ever knew there'd been a problem in the first place. Understood, sir. Good. Now get back to work. That conversation happened 2 weeks before Dad's retirement dinner. 2 weeks before Daniel stood up and made a joke about headsets and coffee cups. 2 weeks before I smiled and said nothing while people laughed. Because what could I say? The classification was there for a reason. Operational security mattered more than my pride. And even if I could have told Daniel, even if the rules had allowed it, I wasn't sure he would have understood. He'd spent his career measuring service by proximity to danger, by dust on your boots and brass casings on the ground. My contributions were abstract to him, invisible, easy to dismiss. So I let him dismiss them. But something had changed inside me. A line had been crossed, and I couldn't pretend it hadn't. After that dinner, Daniel texted me. "Great seeing you tonight." Dad was really happy. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Yeah, it was good. He didn't text again. The weeks that followed felt strange. Hollow. I went to work, did my job, came home. I ran in the evenings, long routes through the neighborhoods around my apartment, letting the rhythm of my footsteps clear my head. I didn't call Daniel. He didn't call me. Mom noticed. "Everything okay between you and your brother?" she asked during one of our weekly phone calls. "Fine. You sure? He mentioned you seemed distant at the dinner." I almost laughed. "I'm distant." Shelby, Mom, it's fine. We're both busy. She didn't push, but I could hear the worry in her voice. The truth was, I wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. I was tired. Tired of defending a career I believed in. Tired of minimizing my work so other people felt comfortable. Tired of sitting at tables where my contributions were treated like clerical footnotes. Colonel Pierce must have sensed it. A few weeks later, he pulled me aside after a briefing. You doing all right, Croft? Yes, sir. You seem off. I hesitated. Just thinking about things, sir. What kind of things? About what we do. About why it matters. He nodded slowly. You questioning the work? No, sir. I know the work matters. I'm questioning whether anyone else knows. He was quiet for a moment, then gestured for me to follow him. We walked to a secure conference room, empty and silent. He closed the door and turned to face me. Let me tell you something, he said. Most people in this world will never know what you do. They'll never understand the decisions you make, the problems you prevent, the lives you save by getting the details right. That's the nature of intelligence work. We operate in the shadows because that's where we're most effective. I know that, sir. Do you? Because it sounds like you're looking for validation. The word stung, but he wasn't wrong. Maybe I am, I admitted. Then you're in the wrong line of work. Validation is for politicians and generals. We do this job because it needs to be done, not because someone's going to pin a medal on our chest. I understand, sir. I'm not sure you do. But you will. Because one day, someone's going to recognize what you did. Maybe not publicly, maybe not in a way that feels satisfying. But they'll know. And that'll have to be enough. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I believed him. But he was right about one thing. I couldn't keep doing this job if I needed external validation. The work had to be its own reward. A month later, our team received a commendation from the Pentagon. It was a quiet ceremony, held in a secure facility, attended by a handful of senior officers. No press. No fanfare. Just a brief acknowledgement that our unit had contributed significantly to operational security and strategic intelligence objectives. Colonel Pierce shook my hand afterward. That's as close to a thank you as you'll get in this job, Croft. I'll take it, sir. And I meant it. Because standing in that room, surrounded by people who understood what we did and why it mattered, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Pride. Not the loud, performative kind. The quiet kind. The kind that didn't need an audience. Daniel never knew about the commendation. Never knew about the intercepted call. Never knew about any of it. And slowly, I realized I didn't need him to. The months after Dad's retirement dinner passed in a kind of muted routine. I worked. I ran. I went to the occasional social event with colleagues, the kind of gatherings where everyone understood the unspoken rule. Don't ask too many questions. It was easier that way, existing in a world where people already knew what classified meant and didn't expect you to explain. Daniel and I didn't talk much. We exchanged texts on birthdays, on holidays, the bare minimum required to maintain the appearance of a relationship. Mom would ask about him during our calls, and I'd say he was fine, and she'd say I should reach out more, and I'd agree without meaning it. The distance felt necessary. Self-preserving. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. I threw myself into work. Our team was tracking increased communications activity between Russian intelligence networks and various intermediaries across Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Nothing immediately alarming, but the volume and frequency suggested something was shifting. Colonel Pierce assigned me to lead a sub-team focused specifically on Arabic language intercepts originating from Baghdad and Damascus. It was tedious work. Hours of audio files, most of which turned out to be administrative chatter, logistical coordination, nothing actionable. But you couldn't afford to assume. Every file had to be reviewed, transcribed, analyzed. Because the one time you skipped something, that'd be the one that mattered. I was good at it. Better than good. I had a knack for hearing patterns, for catching inconsistencies, for noticing when someone's tone didn't match their words. Language wasn't just about vocabulary and grammar. It was about context, subtext, the spaces between what people said and what they meant. One evening, about 6 months after Dad's retirement, I was reviewing a batch of intercepts when one file caught my attention. The conversation was between two men, one speaking Arabic with a distinct Iraqi dialect, the other with a slight Russian accent underneath his Arabic. The topic seemed mundane, discussing schedules, confirming meetings, but something felt off. I played it back 3 times. Then I pulled up the existing translation, the one submitted by the contractor. It was wrong. Not catastrophically, but enough to change the meaning. The contractor had translated a phrase as "the shipment will arrive next month," but the actual wording, accounting for idiomatic usage, was closer to "the arrangement will be finalized next month." Shipment implied goods. Arrangement implied something more abstract. An agreement. A deal. I flagged it for further review and cross-referenced it with other intercepts from the same network. A pattern emerged. Over the past 3 months, there'd been a series of similar conversations, all using vague, transactional language that could have been dismissed as routine if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. I drafted a report outlining the pattern, noting the linguistic nuances that suggested coordinated planning rather than isolated transactions. I recommended escalating the surveillance and tasking additional collection assets to monitor the network. Colonel Pierce approved it. 2 weeks later, the intelligence contributed to identifying a covert meeting between a Russian intelligence officer and an Iraqi militia leader. The meeting itself didn't result in immediate action, but it confirmed what we'd suspected: coordination was happening. Quietly. Deliberately. It was the kind of victory that no one outside the intelligence community would ever hear about. No headlines. No press conferences. Just a memo that circulated among senior officers, acknowledging that our analysis had been timely and valuable. I felt satisfied. Vindicated, even. But also alone. Because there was no one I could tell. No one I could share it with. Mom wouldn't understand the significance. Dad would nod politely but wouldn't really get it. And Daniel would probably make another joke. So I kept it to myself. One Saturday afternoon, Mom called and asked if I'd come to dinner that night. "Just family," she said. "Dad's grilling. Daniel and Jenna will be there." I hesitated. "Please, Shelby. It's been too long." "All right," I said. "I'll be there." I arrived at 1800 hours, right as the sun was starting to dip below the tree line. The smell of charcoal and grilling meat filled the air. Dad was on the patio, tongs in hand, beer on the side table. Daniel and Jenna were sitting on the porch, talking and laughing. Mom waved at me from the kitchen window. It looked idyllic. Normal. I felt like an intruder. "Hey, stranger," Daniel said when I walked up. He stood and gave me a quick hug, the kind that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "Hey, you look good. Staying busy?" "Always." Jenna smiled. "We've missed you. It's been a while." "Yeah, work's been intense." Daniel grinned. Still translating the world into submission? There it was. That edge. Playful on the surface, cutting underneath. I smiled. Something like that. Dinner was fine. We ate steak and corn and talked about safe topics: Jenna's job, Mom's garden, a trip Dad was planning to visit an old army buddy. I contributed when appropriate, laughed when expected, and mostly stayed quiet. At one point, Daniel started talking about a training exercise he'd participated in, something involving coordinated maneuvers with an armored unit. He was animated, engaged, clearly proud of the work he'd done. Dad asked questions. Mom listened attentively. Jenna squeezed his hand. I felt invisible. After dinner, I helped Mom clear the table. She was unusually quiet, her movements precise and deliberate. "You and Daniel seem distant," she said finally. "We're fine." "Shelby, Mom, really? We're fine. We're just different people doing different jobs." She stopped washing a plate and looked at me. "He loves you. You know that, right?" "I know." "Then why does it feel like you're both trying so hard not to be in the same room?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was complicated. Daniel did love me in his own way. But he also resented me. And I'd stopped trying to reconcile those two things. "It's just how things are right now," I said. Mom sighed. "I wish it were different." Me too. But I wasn't sure I meant it. Later, as I was leaving, Daniel walked me to my car. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah. Why?" "You just seem I don't know. Off. I unlocked the car and opened the door. I'm fine, Daniel. You sure? Because if something's going on, nothing's going on. I'm just tired. He nodded slowly, unconvinced. All right. Well, don't be a stranger. I won't. But as I drove away, watching him in the rearview mirror, I knew I was lying. Because being a stranger was easier than being dismissed. The promotion to lieutenant colonel came through in early spring. I found out via email on a Tuesday morning, sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. The subject line read, "Promotion list, congratulations." I opened it, scanned the text, and saw my name halfway down. Lieutenant Colonel Shelby Croft. Oh, 5. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting to feel something. Pride. Excitement. Relief. But what I felt mostly was tired. Colonel Pierce stopped by my desk an hour later. Congratulations, Croft. Thank you, sir. You earned it. Ceremonies in 6 weeks. Start thinking about who you want there. I nodded. Who did I want there? The promotion ceremony was held on a Friday afternoon in late April, in a conference room on post that smelled like floor polish and old coffee. It was a small gathering, Colonel Pierce, a few colleagues from my unit, Mom and Dad. I'd invited Daniel, sent him the details 3 weeks in advance, but he'd texted the night before saying he couldn't make it. Duty, he'd written. Sorry. Proud of you, though. I didn't respond. The ceremony itself was brief and formal. Colonel Pierce read the promotion orders, pinned the new rank insignia on my uniform, and shook my hand. A photographer took a few pictures. People clapped politely. And then it was over. Afterward, Mom hugged me tightly. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Thanks, Mom. Dad shook my hand, his grip firm. Well done, Shelby. You've worked hard for this. I have. He hesitated, like he wanted to say more, then nodded and stepped back. We went to lunch at a restaurant near Post, the 3 of us sitting in a booth by the window. The conversation was light, careful, full of questions about the new role and what it would entail. I answered as best I could without revealing anything classified, and they nodded along, trying to understand. At one point, Mom asked, "Is Daniel going to call later?" I don't know. I'm sure he will. He's been so busy lately. I didn't argue. When lunch was over, I walked them to their car. Mom hugged me again, longer this time, and whispered, "Don't let the distance between you and Daniel grow too much. You only have one brother." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure what she expected me to do about it. That evening, I sat in my apartment, still in uniform, staring at the new rank on my collar. Lieutenant Colonel. It should have felt like an achievement. Instead, it felt like confirmation of something I'd known for a while. I was doing this alone. Daniel never called. The weeks that followed were busy. My new role came with expanded responsibilities, overseeing multiple intelligence teams, coordinating with other agencies, briefing senior leadership. I worked long hours, often staying late to review reports or prepare presentations. The work was demanding but fulfilling. I was good at it. People respected me. But outside of work, my life felt empty. I didn't have many close friends. Most of my relationships were professional, cordial, but not deep. I'd go days without talking to anyone outside of meetings or briefings. On weekends, I'd run, read, catch up on sleep. Sometimes I'd call Mom, listen to her talk about the garden or Dad's latest project. She'd ask about Daniel, and I'd deflect. Have you talked to him lately? Not really. You should call him. Maybe. But I never did. In early summer, our unit received new intelligence indicating a significant uptick in Russian communications related to Syria. The intercepts suggested potential coordination with Iranian-backed militias, possibly in preparation for some kind of operation. It wasn't clear yet what the operation was, but the volume and tone of the communication suggested something was being planned. I assigned teams to focus on specific networks, prioritizing Arabic and Farsi intercepts. We worked around the clock, sifting through audio files, building link diagrams, trying to piece together the bigger picture. One evening, around 2200 hours, I was alone in the operations center, reviewing a batch of intercepts that had just come in. Most of it was routine, logistical coordination, personnel movements, nothing immediately actionable. Then I heard it. A phrase, spoken quickly in Arabic, almost buried under background noise. The timeline has moved forward. I replayed the file. The speaker was Iraqi, mid-30s, based on vocal patterns, talking to someone off mic. The context was vague, but the phrase itself was specific. Timelines don't move forward unless something's changed. Unless someone's decided to accelerate. I pulled up the metadata. The call had been intercepted 3 days earlier, flagged as low priority by the initial screener. But combined with other intercepts from the same network, it wasn't low priority at all. It was a warning. I drafted an urgent report, flagged it for immediate review, and sent it up the chain. Colonel Pierce called me at 0200 hours. Your analysis is solid, Croft. We're escalating this. Get some sleep. You've done your job. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop. Because I knew what this meant. Somewhere, people were making decisions based on the intelligence we'd provided. Plans were being adjusted. Resources were being moved. And if we were right, if the analysis held, we might prevent something bad from happening. But we'd never know for sure. That was the hardest part. The uncertainty. The not knowing whether your work mattered or if it was just noise in a system too big to fully understand. 2 weeks later, Colonel Pierce told me our analysis had been used to inform a decision to increase surveillance on specific networks. The operation, whatever it was, had been postponed. Possibly abandoned. You did good work, Croft. Thank you, sir. I mean it. This is why we do what we do. I nodded. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved. And tired. That evening, I called Mom. How are you, sweetheart? Good. Busy. Always busy. You need to take care of yourself. I am. She was quiet for a moment. Daniel's coming to visit next weekend. You should come too. It'd be nice to have everyone together. I hesitated. I don't know if I can. Shelby, I'll try. But I didn't. Because I wasn't ready. Not yet. And maybe not ever. A year passed. Then another 6 months. Time moved in the way it does when you're immersed in work that demands everything quickly and slowly at once. Days blurred together, punctuated by briefings, intercepts, late nights in secure facilities. I lost track of birthdays, anniversaries, the small markers that other people use to measure their lives. My career flourished. I briefed generals, coordinated with allied intelligence agencies, led a team that was consistently cited for excellence. Colonel Pierce retired, and his replacement, a sharp woman named Colonel Andrea Voss, took over. She was efficient, direct, and had a reputation for recognizing talent. You're doing exceptional work, Croft, she told me during one of our early meetings. I'm recommending you for a position at the Defense Language and Signals Liaison Unit. It's a leadership role, strategic level. Interested? Absolutely, ma'am. Good. I'll start the paperwork. The recommendation went through. 6 months later, I was reassigned to lead the unit, overseeing training programs and operational coordination between military linguists and signals intelligence teams. It was exactly the kind of role I'd been working toward my entire career. But it also meant longer hours, more travel, less time for anything resembling a personal life. I stopped going to family dinners. Not intentionally, not out of spite. I just couldn't find the time. Mom would call, disappointed but understanding. Dad would leave voicemails, brief and formal, saying he was proud of me. Daniel didn't call at all. I told myself it was fine. We were all adults, living separate lives. People grew apart. It happened. But sometimes, late at night, sitting alone in my apartment, I'd wonder if I'd made a mistake. If I'd let pride or stubbornness or some misguided sense of self-preservation cost me something I couldn't get back. Then I'd go to work, and the questions would fade. In late October, nearly 2 years after Dad's retirement dinner, Mom called with an invitation I couldn't refuse. Your father's having a birthday dinner, she said. His 75th. It's going to be a big one. Some of his old Army friends are coming. General Sloan's going to be there. General Robert Sloan. Dad's old commander, a retired 2-star who'd moved on to consulting and defense contracting after leaving the service. I'd met him a few times over the years, always found him sharp, thoughtful, the kind of officer who listened more than he spoke. "I'll be there," I said. "Good. Daniel and Jenna are coming too. It'll be nice to have everyone together." I didn't say what I was thinking, that everyone together hadn't felt nice in a long time. The dinner was at the same restaurant we'd gone to for Dad's retirement. White tablecloths, dim lighting, the hum of quiet conversations. I arrived early, before most of the guests, and found Mom in the private dining room, arranging place cards. "You're here," she said, smiling. She hugged me tightly. "You look good." "Tired, but good." "Thanks, Mom. Your father's going to be thrilled. He talks about you all the time, you know." "Does he?" "Of course. He's proud of you, Shelby." "We both are." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Guests started arriving. Dad's old army buddies, men in their 60s and 70s, some still fit and sharp, others showing the wear of decades. They greeted me warmly, asked about my work in the vague way people do when they know not to pry. I made small talk, sipped water, and waited. Daniel arrived with Jenna just before 1800 hours. He was in civilian clothes, dress slacks, and a button-down, his hair shorter than I remembered. He smiled when he saw me, a careful, measured smile. "Hey, Shelby." "Hey." Jenna hugged me. "It's so good to see you. You look amazing." "Thanks. You too." We exchanged pleasantries, surface-level updates. He'd been promoted to major, was working at Fort Benning now, training junior officers. Jenna was expecting their first child. I congratulated them, and they thanked me, and the conversation felt like something scripted, rehearsed. General Sloan arrived last, a tall man with silver hair and a commanding presence that filled the room even in retirement. Dad greeted him warmly, and they fell into easy conversation, the kind that comes from decades of shared experience. Dinner began. The food was excellent: steaks, roasted vegetables, wine that flowed freely. The conversation was lively, full of stories and laughter. Dad was in his element, surrounded by people who understood the world he'd lived in. Daniel sat across from me, and for the first few courses, we barely spoke. But as the evening wore on, as the wine loosened everyone's tongues, he started talking. "So, Shelby," he said, loud enough for the table to hear. "Still doing the translator thing?" I set my fork down. "I lead the Defense Language and Signals Liaison Unit now." "Right. That's great. Still a lot of sitting in offices though, right?" A few people chuckled. Jenna touched his arm, a gentle warning. "Something like that," I said evenly. He grinned. "I'm just saying, it's different from what Dad and I did. You know, boots on the ground stuff. Real soldiering." The table went quiet. General Sloan looked at Daniel, then at me, his expression unreadable. I didn't respond. I just picked up my water glass and took a sip. The waiter approached then, a young man in his mid-20s, dark hair and a polite smile. He addressed the table in lightly accented English. "Would anyone like to see the dessert menu?" Then, almost as an afterthought, he switched to Arabic. "Or should I bring coffee first?" The question was casual, reflexive, probably meant for someone else at another table. But I heard it clearly. And without thinking, I responded, "Coffee first, please. Then dessert." In Arabic. Matching his dialect. Natural and fluent. The table went silent. The waiter blinked, surprised, then smiled and nodded. "Of course." I looked up and found General Sloan staring at me. His face had gone very still. "That accent," he said quietly. "I recognize that accent." I didn't say anything. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "You're the one who intercepted the Moscow call." My heart stopped. Daniel's fork clattered onto his plate. General Sloan continued, his voice low but clear. 2 years ago. Intercepted communication between Moscow and Baghdad. Mistranslation that could have escalated into a serious situation. You corrected it." I swallowed. "Sir, it's all right. I was briefed on it. After the fact. They didn't give me a name, but I know the unit. I know the timeline." He looked at me for a long moment. "It was you." I nodded once. The table was silent. Daniel's face had gone pale. General Sloan turned to him, his expression calm but firm. Your sister prevented a war, son. You might want to rethink the word useless. No one spoke. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. The silence that followed General Sloane's words was absolute. Not the comfortable kind that sometimes settles over a dinner table, but the heavy, suffocating kind that makes every small sound, silverware against china, someone clearing their throat, feel amplified and intrusive. Daniel stared at his plate. Jenna's hand was frozen on his arm. Dad sat very still, his expression unreadable. Mom looked between me and Daniel, her face tight with something I couldn't quite name. Worry, maybe? Or relief. General Sloane picked up his wine glass, took a deliberate sip, and set it down gently. I apologize if I spoke out of turn, Shelby. But I've sat through too many dinners where people who do the real work get overlooked. Figured it was time someone set the record straight. Thank you, sir, I said quietly. He nodded once and turned his attention back to his meal, as if the matter was settled. But it wasn't. Not for Daniel. He sat there, his jaw working, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I could see him trying to process what had just been said, trying to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the person General Sloane had just described. The muscles in his neck were tense, his breathing shallow. Jenna leaned close to him, murmuring something I couldn't hear. He shook his head slightly, then pushed his chair back and stood. "Excuse me," he said, his voice strained. "I need some air." He walked out of the dining room, moving quickly, shoulders rigid. Jenna looked at me, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry. He'll be okay. He needs a minute." "It's fine," I said. But it wasn't fine. And we both knew it. The conversation at the table resumed, hesitant at first, then gradually picking up momentum. People asked General Sloane about his current work, about his time at Yucum, about anything that wasn't what had just happened. He answered smoothly, steering the discussion back to safer territory. I excused myself a few minutes later and stepped outside. The air was cool, sharp with the first hints of autumn. I found Daniel standing near the parking lot, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing in particular. I walked over slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You okay?" He didn't look at me. "I didn't know." "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" "It's classified, Daniel." I couldn't. But he turned to face me, and I saw something raw in his expression. Confusion. Shame. I said all those things. For years. And you just let me. What was I supposed to do? Break operational security to win an argument? No, but he rubbed his face with both hands. God, Shelby. I feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot. Yes, I am. I spent years making jokes about your job, about what you do, and the whole time he stopped, unable to finish the sentence. I waited. "I thought you had the easy gig," he said finally. "Sitting in offices, translating stuff. I thought I was the one doing the hard work, the dangerous work. But he shook his head. You stopped a war. It wasn't just me. It was a team effort. Don't do that. Don't minimize it." "I'm not minimizing it. I'm being accurate." He looked at me for a long moment, then laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I've been a terrible brother. You've been dealing with your own stuff. That's not an excuse." "I'm not saying it is." We stood there in silence, the sounds of the restaurant muffled behind us. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm really sorry." "I know. No, I mean it. I should have," he stopped, struggling. "I should have respected what you do. I should have trusted that it mattered, even if I didn't understand it. You didn't trust me because I never gave you a reason to. I couldn't. That's the nature of the job. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Are we okay? You and me." I thought about it. About the years of small cuts, the accumulated weight of being dismissed and underestimated. About the silence I'd chosen, the walls I'd built. About whether any of it could be undone. "I don't know," I said honestly. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "What do I need to do?" "Just stop. Stop making jokes. Stop acting like what I do doesn't matter. I don't need you to understand it. I just need you to respect it." "I can do that." "Can you?" "Yes." He met my eyes. "I can. I will." I wanted to believe him. But trust, once broken, doesn't repair overnight. Okay, I said. We stood there a little longer, neither of us quite ready to go back inside. Finally, Jenna appeared in the doorway, her silhouette backlit by the restaurant's warm glow. You two good? She called. Yeah, Daniel said. We're good. We walked back inside together. The dinner continued, the tension from earlier gradually dissipating. General Sloan told stories about Dad's early career, about operations in places I'd only read about, and everyone laughed and listened. Dad looked content, surrounded by people who understood the life he'd lived. At one point, he raised his glass. To family, he said. And to service. In all its forms. Everyone drank. I glanced at Daniel. He was looking at me, his expression serious. He raised his glass slightly, a small acknowledgement. I raised mine in return. After dinner, as people were saying their goodbyes, General Sloan pulled me aside. I hope I didn't cause problems, he said. You didn't. Your brother needed to hear it. Sometimes people need a wake-up call. I appreciate it, sir. He smiled. You're doing important work, Shelby. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Not even family. I won't. He shook my hand, firm and respectful, and left. I drove home that night with the windows down, letting the cool air clear my head. I thought about what General Sloan had said, about what Daniel had said, about whether anything had actually changed. I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe there was a path forward. A way to rebuild something that had been broken. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't happen overnight. But it was possible. And that was enough. The weeks after Dad's birthday dinner felt strange. Tentative. Like we were all trying to figure out how to interact with each other without the old scripts, the old dynamics. Daniel texted me a few days later, nothing profound, just, hope work's going well. I responded, you too. Small steps. Careful. Mom called, as she always did, but this time her voice carried something different. Relief, maybe. I'm glad you and Daniel talked, she said. We did. He's been different since that night. Quieter. Thinking about things. That's good. Is it okay between you two now? I don't know yet, Mom. But it's better than it was. She seemed satisfied with that answer. Work continued at its usual relentless pace. The Defense Language and Signals Liaison Unit was expanding, taking on new training programs and operational partnerships. I spent my days in meetings, reviewing curricula, coordinating with other agencies. The work was challenging, strategic, exactly what I'd trained for. Colonel Voss called me into her office one afternoon in early November. Sit down, Croft. I sat. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with that appraising look she had. I've been reviewing the unit's performance metrics. You've done exceptional work here. Thank you, ma'am. I'm recommending you for promotion to Colonel. You've earned it. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Colonel. Oh, 6. The rank Dad had retired at. The rank that felt, in some way, like validation of everything I'd worked for. I don't know what to say, ma'am. Say you'll accept it. I will. Absolutely. She smiled, a rare expression from her. Good. The board meets in 3 months. I expect you'll be selected. Start thinking about what comes next. What came next? I'd been so focused on the present, on surviving each day, each mission, that I hadn't thought much about the future. About where this career would take me. About what I wanted beyond the next rank, the next assignment. That evening, I called Dad. Colonel Voss recommended me for promotion, I told him. To Colonel. There was a pause, then his voice, steady and proud. That's outstanding, Shelby. Your mother and I are very proud of you. Thanks, Dad. You've accomplished more than most people do in twice the time. You should be proud of yourself. I am. I think. He chuckled softly. It's okay to be proud. You've earned it. We talked for a while longer, about logistics, about the timeline, about nothing in particular. When we hung up, I sat in my apartment, staring at the walls, and let myself feel it. Pride. Relief. Something close to contentment. The next morning, Daniel called. Hey, he said. Dad told me about the promotion. Congratulations. Thanks. Colonel Croft. That's impressive. It's just a rank. No, it's not. It's recognition. It's proof that you're damn good at what you do. I didn't know how to respond to that. This version of Daniel, earnest, supportive, was unfamiliar. I appreciate that, I said finally. I mean it, Shelby. I know I didn't always see it. But I do now. Okay. I've been thinking a lot since Dad's dinner. About what General Sloan said. About what you do. And I realized I never asked you about it. Not really. I just assumed. You couldn't have asked. Most of it's classified. I know. But I could have respected it. I could have trusted that it mattered, even if I didn't understand it. You're saying that now. I know. And I know it doesn't undo the past. But I'm trying, Shelby. I want to do better. I believed him. Or at least, I wanted to. Okay, I said. We'll figure it out. Yeah, we will. After that, things shifted. Slowly. Daniel started texting more regularly, asking about work in the vague way you do when you know not to pry, sharing updates about his life, about Jenna's pregnancy. I responded, cautiously at first, then with more ease. We weren't back to where we'd been as kids, but we were building something new. Something that felt more honest. The promotion board met in January. I was selected. The ceremony was scheduled for late February, a formal event on post with full military honors. Colonel Voss would officiate. I invited Mom, Dad, Daniel, and Jenna. This time, Daniel didn't cancel. The ceremony was everything it should have been. Formal, respectful, a recognition of years of service. Colonel Voss pinned the new rank insignia on my uniform, read the orders, and shook my hand. People applauded. A photographer captured the moment. Afterward, during the reception, Daniel approached me. He was in his dress uniform, looking sharp, professional. He saluted, then extended his hand. Congratulations, Colonel. I shook his hand. Thank you, Major. He smiled, a genuine smile. I'm proud of you. I know. I mean it. What you've done, what you're doing, it matters. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. It's okay. No, it's not. But I'm going to do better. I promise. I nodded. I believe you. Mom took a dozen photos, insisting on capturing every angle. Dad stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his expression proud. Jenna hugged me, told me I looked amazing, said she hoped their daughter would grow up to be as strong and accomplished as I was. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. Not just in the army, but in my family. That evening, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my quarters, looking at the new rank on my collar. Colonel. It felt heavy. Not physically, but symbolically. A weight of responsibility, of expectation, of legacy. But it also felt right. I'd earned it. Not by being louder or more visible, but by doing the work. By showing up, day after day, and getting the details right. By preventing crises no one would ever know about. By training people who would go on to do the same. That was the job. That was what mattered. And finally, I felt at peace with it. 3 years later, I stood in a different conference room, in a different building, looking out at a different group of people. The Defense Language and Signals Liaison Unit had grown significantly under my leadership, expanding from a small specialized team to a comprehensive training and operational coordination center. We were working with linguists from every branch, from allied nations, building systems and protocols that would shape how military intelligence operated for years to come. Colonel Voss had moved on to a position at the Pentagon. Her replacement, a sharp and experienced officer named Colonel Marcus Reed, had been supportive from day one, giving me the autonomy to shape the unit's direction while providing guidance when needed. You've built something impressive here, Croft, he told me during one of our quarterly reviews. This unit's becoming the gold standard. Thank you, sir. We've got a good team. You've got a good leader. Don't downplay that. I'd learned not to argue with compliments. Just accept them and move forward. My relationship with Daniel had continued to improve. Slowly, with setbacks, but improvement nonetheless. He and Jenna had 2 children now, a daughter named Claire and a son named Jack. I visited when I could, usually a few times a year, and each time felt a little easier. Daniel no longer made jokes about my work. Instead, he'd ask questions, genuine ones, about leadership and decision-making. He'd started to see the parallels between what we both did, even if the contexts were different. One evening, during a visit to their home in Georgia, we sat on the back porch while the kids played in the yard. Jenna was inside, getting dinner ready. Daniel handed me a beer and settled into the chair beside me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. Do you ever regret it? Choosing intelligence over something more visible?" I thought about it. "No, I don't. Not even a little? Not even a little. I did what I was good at. What I believed in. That's enough." He nodded slowly. "I think I get that now. It took me a while, but I get it. I know. I wish I'd understood it sooner. Would have saved us both a lot of trouble. Maybe. But we got here eventually." He smiled. "Yeah, we did." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Claire chase Jack around the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "You're a good uncle," Daniel said. "The kids adore you. They're good kids. They ask about you all the time. Claire wants to learn Arabic because Aunt Shelby speaks it." I laughed. "Tell her I'll teach her when she's older." "I will." Jenna called us in for dinner, and we spent the evening eating and talking and being a family. It felt normal. Easy. Like something we'd finally figured out how to do right. Dad's health started declining around that same time. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of age and decades of hard living. He moved a little slower, tired more easily, relied more on Mom for day-to-day tasks. I visited more frequently, spending weekends at their house, helping with yard work or just sitting with Dad while he watched old war movies. One afternoon, he looked at me and said, "You did good, Shelby. Better than good." "Thanks, Dad. I mean it. When you first told me you were going into intelligence, I didn't understand it. Thought you were avoiding the hard work." "I know. I was wrong. You are doing the hardest work of all. The kind that doesn't get recognized, doesn't get celebrated. But it matters. It all matters. I'm glad you see that now." He nodded. "I'm proud of you. I should have said it more often. You're saying it now. That's what counts." We sat together in comfortable silence, the television murmuring in the background, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. The promotion to full colonel came with an opportunity to move into a strategic planning role at the Pentagon. It would mean leaving the unit I'd built, leaving the day-to-day operational work, and stepping into a broader, more abstract role shaping policy and doctrine. Colonel Reed called me into his office to discuss it. "It's a good opportunity, Croft. Career-defining." "I know, sir. But it's also a different kind of work. Less hands-on, more bureaucratic." "I've thought about that. And I think I'm ready for it. I've built what I wanted to build here. Now it's time to help others build the same thing elsewhere." He smiled. "That's the right answer. I'll support the move." The transition took 6 months. I handed over leadership of the unit to a capable officer I'd mentored, Major Sarah Chin, and watched as she took the reins with confidence and skill. It felt good, knowing the work would continue, that the foundation I'd laid would support the next generation. My first day at the Pentagon was overwhelming. The building was massive, a labyrinth of hallways and offices and conference rooms. I spent the morning getting oriented, meeting colleagues, trying to absorb the sheer scale of the operation. But I adjusted. I always did. The work was different, as Colonel Reed had warned. More meetings, more memos, more coordinating with people who'd never been in the field. But it was important work. Shaping how the military thought about language, about intelligence, about the invisible infrastructure that kept operations running smoothly. I was good at it. And slowly, I built a new kind of career. One that wasn't about individual missions or specific intercepts, but about systems and strategy, about creating frameworks that would outlast me. Some wars are fought with weapons. Others are prevented with words. Mine just happened to end before it began. That's what I told a group of new linguists during a training session at the Defense Language Institute, years after I'd first walked through those same doors. They were young, eager, uncertain about what they'd signed up for. I saw myself in them, that mix of ambition and anxiety, the desire to prove themselves in a job they didn't yet fully understand. "You're going to do work that no one will ever know about," I told them. You're going to prevent crises that never make the news because you stopped them before they started. You won't get medals. You won't get recognition. But you'll know. And that'll have to be enough. One of them, a young woman in the front row, raised her hand. How do you deal with that? With no one knowing? I smiled. You find your validation in the work itself. In knowing you got the details right. In knowing that somewhere, because of something you did, someone's safer. Someone's alive. That's the job. And it's worth it. She nodded, still uncertain, but I could see her processing it. After the session, I walked through the campus, past the buildings where I'd spent countless hours learning to think in different languages, to hear the world differently. It felt surreal, being back after so many years, seeing how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Claire got an A on her Arabic test. She says it's because you taught her counting. Thanks. I smiled and typed back. Tell her I'm proud of her. I will. Love you, sis. Love you too. I stood there for a moment, looking at those words on the screen. Love you too. Simple. True. Hard one. Respect doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it walks into a room quietly, and everyone finally stands still. That's what I'd learned. That's what I'd fought for. Not recognition, not validation from people who would never understand, but respect. From myself. From my family. From the people whose opinions actually mattered. And I'd earned it. Not by being louder or more visible, but by doing the work. Day after day. Getting the details right. Building something that mattered. That was legacy enough. I walked back to my car, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. Tomorrow, I'd be back at the Pentagon, back in meetings and strategy sessions, shaping the future of military intelligence. But right now, in this moment, I felt at peace. I'd done what I set out to do. I'd served. I'd made a difference. And finally, people knew it. That's my story. If it resonated, tap like, subscribe, and share this with someone whose work is invisible but vital. Your turn, sound off below. Have you ever had to keep a major win quiet because of your job? What's the one skill you have that people underestimate until it matters? How do you handle family who minimize your work? If you were at that dinner, what would you have said to Daniel? Have you ever set a boundary that finally changed the dynamic? Drop your answers in the comments, I read them all. News Stories Weekly.